am a Khaleesi of the Dothraki. I am the wife of the great Khal, and I carry his son inside me. The next time you raise a hand to me will be the last time you have hands.
For a decade, it wasn't just a TV show. It was a cultural monolith, a global event that synchronized the watches of hundreds of millions of people. In an age of fractured, on-demand streaming, Game of Thrones was the last bastion of appointment television. Sunday nights were sacred. Social media would erupt into a minefield of spoilers and hashtags. Parents named their children Khaleesi and Arya. The show's filming locations in Croatia, Iceland, and Northern Ireland saw tourism booms that reshaped their economies. It was, in every sense of the word, a phenomenon. But what if I told you that this cultural behemoth, this titan of television that generated billions of dollars and defined an entire era of entertainment, was built on the ashes of a complete and utter disaster? That the show we all know and obsessed over was almost dead on arrival, a laughingstock in the halls of HBO. Before the Emmys, before the record-breaking ratings, there was a secret first attempt. A ghost pilot so catastrophic that its creators walked away from the screening thinking their careers were over. A version with different actors in the most iconic roles, baffling costumes made from IKEA rugs, and a story so confusing that its own producers couldn't follow it. And the problems didn't stop there. As the show found its footing, major characters would suddenly change faces, leaving viewers with a strange sense of déjà vu. Was it a creative choice, scheduling conflicts, or was it something more? The real stories behind the recasting of Daario Niharis, the Mountain, and even the King himself are crazier and more political than you think. This is the definitive story of how Game of Thrones was saved from the television graveyard. The story of the disaster pilot they don't want you to see, and the real reasons why your favorite characters were secretly replaced. To understand the disaster, you first have to understand the sheer, defiant ambition of the source material. In the 1990s, author George R.R. Martin began writing a song of ice and fire. A former television writer for shows like The Twilight Zone and Beauty and the Beast, Martin had grown deeply frustrated with the inherent limitations of the screen, the budgets, the run times, the constant creative compromises. He called it TV writer PTSD, so as an act of catharsis, he decided to write a story with zero limitations. In his own words, he wanted all the characters I want, and gigantic castles, and dragons, and dire wolves, and hundreds of years of history, and a really complex plot. And it's fine because it's a book. He intentionally wrote it to be unfilmable, a sprawling epic that no sane studio would ever touch. And for years, Hollywood agreed. Movie studios would inquire, but the conclusion was always the same. You'd need a trilogy of films just to get through the first book. It was simply too big. Unfilmable series for HBO. They managed to score a 5-hour meeting with Martin at the Palm restaurant in Los Angeles. For hours, they talked characters, themes, and plot. But the deal was sealed with a single, legendary question from the author. Who is Jon Snow's mother? Benioff and Weiss, having obsessed over the books, gave their theory. It was the correct one. Martin, realizing these two truly understood his world, granted them the rights. HBO, the network behind hits like The Sopranos and The Wire, was the perfect and perhaps only home for such a project. They had the budget, the brand, and the creative freedom. But even for them, this was a monumental gamble. They handed Benioff and Weiss over $10 million to produce a single pilot episode, one of the most expensive pilots ever funded at the time. It was their one shot to prove this unfilmable book could work, and they failed in every conceivable way. In late 2009, the cast and crew flew to locations in Morocco and Northern Ireland to shoot the pilot. On paper, everything looked great. They had a respected director in Tom McCarthy, an indie darling known for quiet, character-driven films like The Station Agent. In hindsight, his subtle, intimate style may have been a mismatch for a sprawling fantasy epic. The problem started immediately. The script, written by the showrunners themselves, was a rookie effort. They later admitted to making fundamental screenwriting errors, like failing to include a single scene that established the Starks as a loving family before tragedy strikes. The result was an episode that felt emotionally hollow. Test audiences had no idea that Jaime and Cersei Lannister were brother and sister, a vital plot point that makes the final window-pushing scene so shocking. The production itself was a calamity. The costumes looked cheap. The infamous story of the Night's Watch cloaks being made from sheared and waxed IKEA floor rugs was a clever trick used in the actual show, but it speaks to the initial low-rent feel they had to overcome. The Targaryen wigs were so bad, they were almost comical. Even George R.R. Martin, who filmed a cameo as a Pentoshi nobleman at Daenerys' wedding, ended up on the cutting room floor when the entire sequence was reshot. But the biggest issue, the one that crippled the entire production, was the casting of two central female characters. The fierce, determined Catelyn Stark was played by the talented, Tony Award-winning actress Jennifer Ehle, and the Mother of Dragons, Daenerys Targaryen, was played by Tamsin Merchant, known for her role in The Tudors. Jennifer Ehle's departure was, by all accounts, an amicable one. After filming the pilot, the esteemed stage and screen actress, who had recently had a child, was reluctant to commit to a multi-year, globe-trotting series that would keep her away from her young family. She graciously bowed out, opening the door for Michelle Fairley, who became the iconic Catelyn we know. The story with Tamsin Merchant is far more mysterious and complex. The official line has always been a mutual decision, but insiders tell a different story. In the unaired pilot, the crucial wedding night scene between Daenerys and Khal Drogo was reportedly a disaster, not just for the characters, but for the actors. Test audiences didn't connect with her portrayal, and sources claim the fundamental chemistry with Jason Momoa's imposing Drogo just wasn't there. For a character whose entire arc is defined by her transformation from a timid girl into a powerful queen, that initial spark was everything. Merchant, a fine actress in her own right who has since found success on shows like Carnival Row, was simply not the right fit. She was out, and the hunt was on for a new Daenerys. The final cut of the pilot was delivered to HBO. Benioff and Weiss, hoping for the best, screened it for their writer friends, Craig Mazin and Scott Frank. The screening was a horror show. Mazin, who would later create HBO's masterpiece Chernobyl, didn't mince words. He took them to lunch and told them, "You guys have a massive problem." Benioff later described the experience. Watching them watch that original pilot was one of the most painful experiences of my life. They had spent over $10 million and they had a dud, a boring, confusing, emotionally vacant hour of television. In the ruthless world of Hollywood, this is usually where the story ends. But then, something miraculous happened. Despite the catastrophic pilot, a few key executives at HBO, namely Carolyn Strauss and Michael Lombardo, still saw glimpses of potential. The world building was impressive, some performances worked, and the source material was still undeniable. Crucially, They had already invested so much money, walking away would mean writing off over $10 million completely. It was a business decision as much as a creative one. In an almost unprecedented move, they gave Benioff and Weiss a second chance. They ordered a full season, but on one condition: they had to fix it, and fix everything. This meant reshoots, a lot of reshoots. Nearly 90% of the original pilot was thrown in the garbage. They hired a new director, Tim Van Patten, an HBO veteran who had helmed episodes of The Sopranos, The Wire, and Boardwalk Empire. He knew how to handle large-scale productions and, more importantly, how to make a scene feel both epic and intimate. They moved production of the Pentos scenes from Morocco to Malta, giving the world a brighter, more distinct visual palette. They completely overhauled the script, adding crucial scenes to clarify relationships and motivations. The quiet scene in the crypts of Winterfell between Robert and Ned. That was a reshoot added to establish their deep history. The scene where Catelyn and Cersei talk about their children. A reshoot added to make sure the audience understood the Targaryen history of incest and the Lannister twins' secret. And most importantly, they had to find their new queen. The casting call went out again for Daenerys Targaryen. Hundreds of actresses auditioned. Then, a relatively unknown actress named Emilia Clarke, who was working multiple jobs to make ends meet, came in. She did a great reading, but her final callback in front of HBO's top executives was the stuff of legend. After a tense audition, the president of HBO, trying to break the ice, jokingly said, "Is there anything else you can do? A dance, maybe?" Clarke, full of nervous energy, launched into a flawless and hilarious, funky chicken and robot dance. She got the part. Her ability to portray both extreme vulnerability and an underlying fire was exactly what the character needed. With Clarke and Michelle Fairley on board, they reshot everything. It cost millions more, but this time it worked. The new pilot was leaner, clearer, and infinitely more compelling. It set the stage for the global phenomenon. Game of Thrones had been saved from the brink. But as the show exploded in popularity, the casting shakeups were far from over. As the show entered its third season, fans were introduced to Daario Niharis, a charming, arrogant sellsword from the company of the Second Sons who catches the eye of Daenerys. He was played by the British actor Ed Skrein, who brought a cocky, almost flamboyant rock and roll swagger to the role. With his long hair and self-assured smirk, he was divisive, but undeniably memorable. Then, Season 4 premiered. Daenerys is on her march to Meereen, and she turns to Daario. But it's not the same man. He was now played by Dutch actor Michiel Huisman, who portrayed him as a more brooding, traditionally handsome, and grounded romantic lead. The show never acknowledged the change. It was one of the most jarring recasts in modern TV history, and it sparked a fierce debate among fans. The official reason given at the time was a scheduling conflict. Skrein had been cast as the lead in the movie The Transporter refueled and supposedly had to leave Thrones. For years, that was the accepted, clean story. But in a later interview, Skrein himself revealed a different truth. He said his departure was far less amicable, claiming it was due to politics. He explained, quote, "My plan was to stay with Game of Thrones for the long haul. It was a wonderful experience, but politics led to us parting ways." While he never gave specifics, reading between the lines suggests the decision was made behind the scenes to go in a different, perhaps more leading man direction with the character, and Skrein was let go. It was a classic Hollywood tale hidden behind a convenient excuse. But Daario wasn't the only character with an identity crisis. Get ready for the strange, three-faced case of Sir Gregor Clegane, the Mountain. This character was played by not one, not two, but three different actors. Let's call it a tale of the stuntman, the stand-in, and the strongman. The stuntman. In Season 1, he was played by Conan Stevens, an Australian actor and stuntman who perfectly embodied the character's sheer size and menace. But Stevens left after one season to take on a more prominent role as an Orc King in Peter Jackson's The Hobbit trilogy. The stand-in. For Season 2, the Mountain was played by Ian White, a Welsh actor who was already part of the Thrones family, having played a White Walker. White is incredibly tall, but his physique was leaner, and some fans felt he lacked the intimidating bulk of the original, especially in his scenes opposite Arya at Harrenhal. The strong man. Finally, in Season 4, as the character geared up for his legendary trial by combat, they found their definitive Mountain. Icelandic strongman Hafthor, Julius Björnsson, took over. The recasts of Daario and the Mountain were obvious, but other changes were more subtle, often involving characters who grew in importance over time. Take the royal children of House Baratheon, or more accurately, House Lannister. In the first two seasons, the sweet, gentle Prince Tommen Baratheon was played by a young child actor named Callum Worry. He was mostly a background character, but as the story progressed, Tommen's role became much more significant. He was destined to become king and marry Marguerite Tyrell. The storylines would involve complex emotional scenes and a wedding night, which would have been impossible and deeply inappropriate with the original child actor. So in Season 4, the role was recast with Dean Charles Chapman. What makes this particularly interesting is that Chapman had already appeared on the show. He played a minor role as the Lannister squire, Martin Lannister, in Season 3. The producers were so impressed with him, they brought him back for the much larger role. A similar story played out with his sister, Myrcella Baratheon. For the first two seasons, she was played by Amy Richardson. After being shipped off to Dorne, the character disappeared for 2 full seasons. When she returned in Season 5, her storyline involved a forbidden romance and became central to the conflict with the Sand Snakes. The role was given to a more experienced actress, Nell Tiger-Free. Amy Richardson took the news in stride, humorously posting a video of herself on the street holding a sign that read, "Princess for Hire." Even the followers of the Lord of Light weren't safe from change. The lightning-wielding Beric Dondarrion was briefly played by David Michael Scott in a single scene in Season 1. When the character returned with a much larger, more charismatic role as the leader of the Brotherhood Without Banners in Season 3, he was played by the brilliant Richard Dormer. And perhaps most notably, the mystical three-eyed Raven was first played by actor Struan Roger in Season 4, only to be replaced in Season 6 by the legendary Oscar-nominated actor Max von Sydow, a clear sign of how the show's prestige had grown to attract A-list talent. The story of the pilot and the recast is a fascinating look behind the curtain, but it also raises a deeper, more critical question. Did the very choices that were made to save the show in its infancy, the need to streamline, simplify, and make it palatable for television, inadvertently plant the seeds for its controversial ending? Think about it. The core lesson from the failed pilot was that George R.R. Martin's books were simply too dense for a direct adaptation. To make it work for a mass audience, characters had to be cut, and complex plot lines had to be condensed. This is the narrative butterfly effect. A small change early on that has massive, unforeseen consequences later. The most famous example is Lady Stoneheart. In the books, Catelyn Stark is resurrected as a silent, terrifying, vengeful wraith who takes over the Brotherhood without banners to hunt down anyone associated with the Red Wedding. She is a major character. Her complete omission from the show meant her storyline, the quest for vengeance against the Freys, had to be given to someone else. It fell to Arya, which fundamentally changed her character arc and the purpose of her journey. This happened time and time again. The show completely cut the Iron Islands Kingsmoot plot from the books, which involved Euron Greyjoy's far more interesting brothers, Victarion and Aeron. The show's version of Euron became a simplified pirate rock star, a shadow of the terrifying, cosmic horror-level villain from the books. The entire Dornish plot was gutted, removing the character of Arianne Martell and simplifying a complex political conspiracy into a messy revenge story. For the first few seasons, this streamlining worked beautifully. They had Martin's books as a roadmap, but then they outpaced him. With Martin still writing, Benioff and Weiss were on their own, forced to become the authors of the conclusion to a story they had only ever adapted. The very streamlining that had saved the show now became a liability. Without the book's rich detail and connective tissue, the final seasons felt rushed to many viewers. Character arcs that needed more time to breathe were concluded in a handful of episodes. The journey from point A to point B often felt like a sprint. The groundwork laid by the books was gone, and the show's foundation began to look shaky. It's almost impossible to imagine a world without Game of Thrones. For all its flaws and controversies, it remains one of the most significant television shows ever made. But it's humbling to remember just how close it came to never existing at all. It was a show born from a $10 million failure, saved by a second chance, and kept afloat by smart, sometimes ruthless, creative decisions. In the years since it ended, every network has been desperately searching for the next Game of Thrones, pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into fantasy epics, but none have captured the global zeitgeist in the same way. The show's legacy is so monumental that even HBO has struggled to replicate it. They famously spent over $30 million on a pilot for a different prequel series, codenamed Blood Moon and starring Naomi Watts, only to scrap the entire project. But the world of Westeros lives on. The prequel series, House of the Dragon, has become a massive success in its own right, a show that feels more confident and polished, having clearly learned from the trials and tribulations of its predecessor. But only time will tell if that continues to stay true. The journey through Westeros was a testament to the monumental challenge of adaptation. It shows that even the biggest successes are often just one bad decision away from being a forgotten pilot in a dusty vault. The history of Game of Thrones isn't just one of fire and blood. It's a story of perseverance, of failure, and of the incredible, messy, and political process of creating something that will be remembered for generations. If you love these kinds of forensic dives into the secret histories and behind-the-scenes drama of your favorite movies and shows, then you'll feel right at home on our channel. Be sure to subscribe to Vintage Vault for more stories you've never heard, about the pop culture you'll never forget. Thanks for watching.